My selfish sister mocked my husband's mechanic job at a family dinner, saying he should find a real career. But then her husband left her speechless. I'm Emma. My life with James is everything I could have dreamed of. He's the kind of man who can fix anything with an engine, and make you laugh while doing it. We met 5 years ago when my car broke down, and I still tease him about using that as his pickup line. As a mechanic, he's built a stellar reputation in our community, and I couldn't be prouder to call him my husband. Last spring, I was focused on building my photography business, specializing in corporate events and professional headshots. I had just finished setting up my new studio when Sarah, my sister, dropped by unannounced. She wore the kind of smile that always felt more like a challenge than a greeting. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Still playing with your little camera? I thought you'd have grown out of that hobby by now." "It's not a hobby, Sarah," I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. "I just landed the Thompson Industries account." Her eyes widened briefly before she masked her reaction. "Really? How interesting. Mark and I were just talking about how vital image is in the professional world." I should have known she was plotting something. A week later, my biggest potential client canceled their contract without explanation. Pamela, my best friend since college and an HR manager at Thompson Industries, filled in the blanks. "Your sister," Pamela said, her voice brimming with anger, "contacted our marketing team. She raised ethical concerns about hiring family members for professional services, and even showed them some amateur photos, claiming they were your work." I gripped my coffee mug tightly, my hands shaking. "She did what?" "That's not all," Pamela added grimly. "She suggested they hire Maria instead. You know, her friend who just started dabbling in photography." My stomach turned. Sarah had always been competitive, but this was deliberate, calculated sabotage. That night, James found me in my home office, crying as I stared at my empty booking calendar. "Hey, engine of my life," he said gently, using his cheesy nickname for me. "Talk to me." I poured out the whole story, and James listened intently. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and started making calls. Tom, his mentor at the auto shop, turned out to be golf buddies with the CEO of Thompson Industries. By the end of the week, not only was my contract reinstated, but they doubled the number of events they wanted me to cover. Pamela spread the word about Sarah's underhanded tactics in professional circles. "Your sister doesn't realize how small the corporate world really is," she told me over lunch. People talk. The final blow to Sarah's scheme came when Maria visited my studio to apologize. "I had no idea she was using me to hurt you," Maria confessed, showing me the messages Sarah had sent her. They detailed the entire plan to undermine my business. That evening, James came home with 3 new client contracts for me. "Turns out mechanics know a lot of business owners who need good photographers," he said with a wink. "Some of my regulars were pretty excited when I mentioned your work." I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. With James's connections and Pamela's support, my business began to thrive again. That night, we celebrated with takeout from our favorite Chinese restaurant. For the first time in weeks, I felt a deep sense of peace and appreciation for the people who had my back. 2 weeks later, at our annual family reunion, the tension with Sarah resurfaced. She and her husband, Dr. Marcus, arrived in a brand new Mercedes, making sure everyone noticed. "Marcus just made partner at the hospital," Sarah announced during dinner, barely touching her food. "We're thinking of buying a vacation home in the Hamptons. You know how important the right connections are." Our cousin Amy, always kind and genuine, turned to James. "How's work going? I heard you were promoted recently." Before James could answer, Sarah cut in with a smirk. "Oh, you're still at that garage? I thought you'd have moved on to something more professional by now. Marcus knows some people in hospital administration. Maybe he could help you find a real career." The table went silent. I watched James's knuckles whiten around his fork, but his voice remained steady. "I appreciate the offer, Sarah, but I love what I do," James replied evenly, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Being a mechanic is a perfectly respectable career." Before Sarah could retort, Tom, James's mentor and a father figure to him, spoke up from across the table. "James just saved the city bus company $50,000 by fixing a problem their so-called specialists couldn't figure out." Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically. "How fascinating. Speaking of transportation, Marcus, didn't you just get a call about a speaking engagement in Europe?" Dr. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Actually, I had to decline. The timing wasn't right." "What do you mean you had to decline?" Sarah's voice rose sharply. "Sarah, perhaps we should discuss this later," Marcus muttered, loosening his tie. The conversation eventually moved on, though I couldn't help but notice Marcus checking his phone repeatedly, his expression growing more concerned with each glance. After dessert, Sarah announced they needed to leave early. "Marcus has an important meeting tomorrow," she explained, fishing for her car keys. "Some of us have real responsibilities." As they drove off, the sound of their Mercedes making a horrible grinding noise stopped everyone mid-conversation. Moments later, it rolled to a halt halfway down the driveway. "This is ridiculous," Sarah's voice carried back to the house.